Human courage is just desperation dressed as pride. The words echoed across the shattered valley as plasma lightning crawled along the horizon like veins of burning glass. Staff Sergeant Ethan Cole tasted copper and dust inside his helmet while his tactical visor flickered at 22% shield integrity. The wind howled across Curry's 9's basalt ridges at nearly 60 miles per hour, carrying static that made his comms hiss and pop. Above him, suspended on a hovering command platform 30 feet off the ground, Queen Valeera Threx watched the battlefield with luminous blue-silver eyes, her crystalline armor refracting the stormlight into shards of cold color. She stood nearly 7 feet tall, posture perfect despite the atmospheric turbulence, every inch the embodiment of alien sovereignty. Ethan adjusted the grip on his rifle but did not raise it. He had learned that pointing weapons at royalty rarely improved negotiations. Around them, the conflict had quieted into an uneasy pause, disabled transport smoldered, warning lights blinked in uneven rhythm, and somewhere beyond the ridgeline a damaged engine wailed like a wounded animal. Ethan's squad was gone, evacuated or scattered, and the retreat beacon pulsed red on his wrist display, urging him back to the extraction zone half a mile east. He ignored it. Valeera's voice carried effortlessly through external speakers, smooth and resonant. "You remain human. Your forces withdraw." Ethan glanced at the sky where dark storm bands twisted together, forming a luminous spiral of charged particles. "I don't run when people are still out here," he said, his tone steady, Midwestern calm wrapped in carbon fiber and grit. A faint ripple of amusement crossed her expression. "You mistake stubbornness for honor." Before he could respond, a tremor rolled through the valley floor. The storm intensified, violet arcs leaping from ridge to ridge, striking exposed metal with blinding flashes that left after images across his visor. Warning indicators flared amber. Atmospheric ionization levels spiked beyond safe parameters. Valeera turned her gaze upward, calculating. "Your world's weapons destabilized the upper currents," she observed coolly. "Primitive engineering." Ethan almost smiled. "We could say the same about yours." Another surge cracked overhead, closer this time, and the hovering platform beneath her faltered, its antigrave emitters sputtering in protest. For a split second the Queen's balance shifted, not enough for panic, but enough for reality to intrude. The platform dipped 10 feet before stabilizing, sparks dancing along its edge. Ethan's visor clock ticked down shield life by the second. He knew the safe move. Fall back. Survive. File the after-action report. Instead, he stepped forward into the rising static, boots grinding against volcanic rock. The air smelled like hot rain on steel. Valeera studied him as if examining a flawed equation. "You will not survive the storm center, Sergeant," she said. Ethan shrugged beneath 200 pounds of combat armor. "Didn't plan on visiting," he replied. The spiral above them tightened, luminous bands rotating faster, the pressure change making his ears ache even through helmet seals. Somewhere in the chaos, a disabled alien scout craft sparked to life and then died again. The valley was becoming a bowl for something larger than either army. Ethan felt the weight of the moment settle over him, heavy but clear. He looked up at the Queen who had mocked him minutes before, who commanded fleets and spoke of dominance like it was physics. "You should get to lower ground," he called out. "Storm's about to get worse." For the first time, Valeera did not answer immediately. The wind caught the edges of her mantle and the platform shuddered again, dipping harder this time. A fracture of plasma split the sky and struck the ridge behind her, sending a wave of force through the air that rattled Ethan's armor and forced him to one knee. When he rose, the platform was no longer steady. It listed to one side, emitters whining at critical overload. Valeera's expression did not show fear. But it showed calculation. And for the first time, uncertainty. The platform dropped another 5 feet and this time it did not recover smoothly. One of the anti-grave emitters flared white and went dark, leaving the entire structure tilting at a dangerous angle above a field of jagged basalt. Ethan felt the vibration through the soles of his boots even from 30 yards away, a deep mechanical shudder that did not belong to wind alone. His visor flashed a proximity warning as charged particles thickened in the air, crawling over his armor in thin violet threads. "Your transport is failing," he called out, forcing his voice through static. Queen Valeera remained upright, one hand gripping the rail as if the storm itself were an inconvenience rather than a threat. "It will stabilize," she said, though her gaze flicked toward the dimmed emitter. Another pulse rolled through the valley and the fractured ridge behind her collapsed inward, not in an explosion but in a slow surrender, slabs of stone shearing away under electromagnetic stress. The shockwave rippled outward, knocking Ethan back a step. His shield integrity dropped to 17%. The retreat beacon pulsed again on his wrist, brighter now, urgent. He reached up and muted it. Above, the storm spiral tightened further, descending in a luminous funnel that painted everything in harsh blue light. The platform jerked violently, dipping nearly 15 feet in a single lurch before catching on its remaining emitters. A warning siren began to echo from the underside of the craft, high and relentless. Valeera looked down at him, not mocking now, not amused. "Calculating." "Human," she said, and this time the word carried weight. "The ion concentration is exceeding safe parameters for your physiology." Ethan almost laughed at that. "Appreciate the concern," he replied, stepping closer to the unstable platform. The air pressure shifted again, squeezing against his armor, making each breath feel heavier despite full filtration. He could see the strain in the craft now, hairline fractures of light spreading along its frame as the storm fed on every metallic surface. "Descend manually," he shouted. "Shut down the damaged emitter before it cascades." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "You presume to instruct me?" The platform lurched again, harder, tilting so sharply that loose fragments skidded off its edge and vanished into the swirling haze below. Ethan did not look away. "I am telling you what your engineers are not here to say," he answered. For a long second she held his gaze, the storm reflecting in her irises like distant galaxies. Then she knelt, placing her palm against the control interface embedded in the platform floor. Symbols flared beneath her touch. The damaged emitter sputtered once more and then powered down completely. The platform dropped the remaining 20 feet in a controlled descent, landing with a jarring impact that sent dust and charged mist outward in a low ring. Ethan staggered but stayed upright. The Queen stepped off the craft, now on the same ground as the human she had mocked. Even at eye level she towered over him, armor humming softly as it redistributed energy. The storm continued to build overhead, closer now, louder, a living ceiling of light. She regarded him in silence for a heartbeat. That felt longer than it should have. "You disobeyed your retreat signal," she observed. Ethan lowered his rifle and met her stare through the scratched visor. "Yes," he said simply. For the first time since the battle began, she did not correct his tone. The ground beneath them vibrated with a low rolling hum as the storm ceiling descended another few hundred feet, compressing the air until every breath felt filtered through static. Ethan's visor display flickered and recalibrated, warning him that ambient charge density had crossed into the red. 14% shield integrity. He could feel the heat building along the seams of his armor, not enough to burn, but enough to remind him that he was standing in the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong person. Queen Valeera stepped fully clear of the disabled platform, her boots touching basalt that still shimmered from residual energy. Without the height of her command dais she seemed less distant, though no less imposing. The crystalline lattice of her armor adjusted around her frame, faint lines of light pulsing from her collar to her gauntlets as internal systems compensated for the storm. She looked toward the horizon where the spiral core rotated, now less than half a mile away, a rotating wall of luminous plasma descending like a slow, inevitable verdict. "Your evacuation window is closing," she said. Her voice no longer carried mockery. It carried measurement. Ethan followed her gaze. Through the haze he could barely make out the faint blinking of the human extraction shuttle, grounded behind a ridge to the east. It would not wait forever. "So is yours," he replied. A jagged arc leapt from cloud to ground 200 yards away, not striking them but close enough that the shock rattled his teeth. The electromagnetic surge rolled outward in a visible ripple, crawling across the surface of the valley floor. When it reached them, Ethan's armor flared with defensive light and then dimmed again. 12%. Valera studied the readings projected along the inner surface of her visor, eyes moving with precise calculation. If the storm center passes directly over this valley, both of our forces will lose remaining aerial support, she said. Your species will call this a natural disaster. Mine will call it a strategic failure. Ethan let out a slow breath. Or we could call it a reason to get out of the open. She turned her attention back to him. The wind caught the edges of her mantle, lifting it behind her like a banner carved from starlight. You remain here, she said. Not for victory. Not for glory. Why? It was not an accusation. It was a question. Ethan hesitated, not because he lacked an answer, but because the simplest ones were hardest to translate across galaxies. Because someone has to make sure everyone gets a chance to leave, he said at last. Does not matter what flag they carry. Another tremor rippled through the valley, stronger this time, forcing both of them to widen their stance. The disabled platform behind them finally gave way, one support strut collapsing as residual charge overloaded its core. It tipped slowly and settled onto its side in a shower of harmless sparks, metal hissing as it met superheated air. Valera watched it fall without flinching. Then she looked back at Ethan. The storm wall was close enough now that he could see distinct currents rotating within it, like rivers of light folding over each other. To pass side by side. Fine particles of ionized dust lifted from the ground and swirled around them in glowing ribbons, crawling over Queen Valera's armor and scattering in pale sparks. Ethan leaned into the wind and pushed forward, boots slipping once before finding traction. His visor display flashed 11% shield integrity and falling. We have maybe 3 minutes before the core passes over this sector, Valera said, her voice steady despite the rising howl around them. She moved with controlled precision, long strides closing the distance to the ravine as if the storm were simply another variable to account for. Ethan kept pace as best he could, lungs working harder now under the increasing pressure. The sky above them no longer looked like sky. It looked like a living ceiling of rotating light, bands of violet and white folding inward toward a center that pulsed with silent intensity. Another surge rolled through the valley floor, causing the ground to vibrate beneath their boots. Ethan stumbled and caught himself against the rock wall just outside the ravine mouth. His glove sparked faintly where it touched the charged surface. Basalt is holding, he muttered, scanning the rock density with his wrist display. Natural insulation. Good call. Valera paused just inside the narrow passage, turning slightly so her armored shoulder shielded him from a direct gust. The gesture was subtle but intentional. The ravine narrows after 30 feet, she said. The walls will absorb some of the lateral discharge. A horizontal arc of plasma swept across the valley behind them, not striking directly but illuminating the entire landscape in a harsh, colorless glare. For a moment their shadows stretched long and thin along the ravine walls before dissolving into darkness again. Ethan stepped fully inside, the basalt rising nearly 40 feet above them on either side, reducing the wind to a lower, funneling roar. His shield indicator dipped to 9% and then stabilized slightly as exposure lessened. He exhaled slowly. You ever think about standing down? He asked, not looking at her, focusing instead on securing his footing against the uneven ground. Ending it before worlds start breaking. Valera regarded him through the faint glow of her visor interface. My species does not ascend to leadership by surrendering, she replied. Another tremor pulsed through the stone beneath their feet, smaller here but still present. Ethan nodded once. Mine does not. Either, he said. But we do sometimes step between the fire and the people behind us. The storm core drew closer, its rotation now visible even from within the ravine as flickering light danced across the narrow strip of sky above. The air grew warmer, charged with a metallic tang that settled at the back of his throat. Valera's armor emitted a low harmonic tone as it redistributed energy, preparing for higher impact. She took one more step deeper into the ravine, then stopped. The space ahead constricted sharply, forcing them into single file. She looked back at him, eyes reflecting the approaching glow. You will follow closely, she said. It was not a command filled with superiority. It was coordination. Ethan gave a short nod and adjusted his position behind her, less than 2 feet apart now, the stormlight tracing sharp lines along their armor. Above them, the first true edge of the storm core began to pass overhead, and the ravine walls vibrated with a deep, resonant hum that felt almost alive. The storm core settled directly above the ravine and the sound changed from a howl to a sustained, resonant roar that pressed against Ethan's chest like a second heartbeat. The basalt walls on either side vibrated in a steady tremor, fine dust shaking loose and drifting downward in slow motion through charged air. His visor display flickered again and then stabilized at 8% shield integrity, the numbers glowing red at the edge of his vision. He focused on placing each step carefully behind Queen Billionaire, her armored silhouette illuminated by pulses of white light spilling over the narrow strip of sky above them. The passage tightened further until the rock brushed his shoulder plates on both sides, forcing him to angle slightly to move forward. Heat built gradually, not scorching but constant, like standing too close to a massive engine core. Energy density increasing, Billionaire said quietly. Her voice carried without strain despite the thunder above. The storm is drawing from residual weapon discharge in the upper atmosphere. Ethan could see faint arcs skimming along the ravine rim, crawling like living veins before dispersing harmlessly into the thicker stone. He swallowed against the metallic taste in his mouth. Then it will burn itself out, he replied. Eventually. She slowed and raised one hand, signaling him to stop. Ahead, the ravine dipped sharply downward into a deeper channel where the walls nearly met overhead, leaving only a narrow seam of light. The floor sloped at a steep angle for about 20 feet before leveling out. A faint stream of condensed moisture ran along the stone, hissing softly as charged particles met the thin layer of water. Billionaire scanned the descent with a brief pulse from her gauntlet interface. This section will amplify ground conduction, she said. If a major discharge strikes above us, the energy will seek the lowest path. Ethan glanced at the water tracing the rock and then at his own armor status. 7%. He made a decision before doubt could settle in. Then we do not stand at the bottom, he said. We move through it before the peak hits. A sudden vertical arc tore across the sky overhead, bright enough to turn the ravine interior stark white for a full second. The vibration that followed was deeper than before, not violent but immense, as if the planet itself had inhaled. Ethan felt his knees threaten to buckle and forced himself upright. Billionaire turned slightly toward him, her expression unreadable behind the glow of her visor. You're exceeding safe stress thresholds, she observed. Your biological signals are unstable. He let out a slow breath that fogged briefly inside his helmet before the filtration system cleared it. Still standing, he said. Without further debate she began descending the slope channel, movements controlled, weight distributed evenly to avoid slipping on the damp stone. Ethan followed close enough that the faint hum of her armor blended with the warning tones in his own suit. The temperature spiked another few degrees, beads of condensation turning to steam along the rock face. As they reached the midpoint of the descent, the storm above shifted tone again, rising to a higher pitch that vibrated through bone and metal alike. Ethan's display flashed 6% and then 5%. He felt the field around him thinning, the protective layer between his body and the charged air weakening with each passing second. Billionaire reached the lower section and pivoted to face him, extending one armored hand back up the incline. The gesture was simple. Not command. Not superiority. Assistance. For half a second he hesitated, pride flickering through him out of habit. Then another surge rolled overhead, stronger than the last, and the ravine walls glowed faintly in response. Ethan reached forward and grasped her forearm. Her grip was firm and steady as she guided him down the final stretch just as the brightest pulse yet began to descend toward their position. The brightest pulse yet crashed over the ravine rim and for a split second the world turned white, not with destruction but with overwhelming light that erased shadow and depth. Ethan felt the surge before he saw its effect, a heavy pressure slamming into his failing shield as his display dropped from 5% to 3% in a single blinking warning. The basalt walls answered with a deep, resonant hum, channeling the energy along their length instead of through it. The air inside the narrow passage grew hotter, thick and metallic, every breath filtered but still tasting like heated iron. Queen Billionaire did not release his forearm. Instead she stepped closer, positioning herself slightly uphill from him as the conduction wave rolled down the slope in a visible shimmer across the stone. Her armor flared with brilliant blue light, absorbing and redistributing charge in controlled pulses. Ethan's suit responded slower, less elegantly. His shield indicator flickered at 2% and then failed entirely, the red warning replaced by a flat grey line. The world did not explode around him. It simply became more real. The heat pressed harder against the outer layers of his armor. The vibration under his boots intensified. He tightened his grip on her forearm to steady himself. "My defensive field has collapsed," he said evenly, forcing calm into his voice. Valeera's gaze sharpened. "Remain behind me," she replied without hesitation. Another wave descended from above, smaller but concentrated, and this time she pivoted fully to face him, placing her body between Ethan and the narrow seam of sky. The crystalline lattice along her back brightened, forming overlapping facets that redirected stray arcs outward into the ravine walls. The impact was not violent but immense, a sustained current that made the stone glow faintly where energy passed. Ethan felt the temperature spike again and a warning tone sounded inside his helmet indicating internal cooling strain. Sweat gathered along his collar despite the regulated suit environment. "You will not withstand repeated exposure," Valeera said, her voice lower now, less measured, more immediate. He managed a faint smile she could not see. "Good thing you are standing in front." The next surge arrived faster than expected. A concentrated ribbon of plasma that skimmed the ravine edge and split into branching tendrils before dissipating. One narrow strand slipped past her shoulder shield and struck the stone near Ethan's boots, sending a jolt through the ground. His armor absorbed part of it, enough to make his muscles seize briefly. He staggered but did not fall. Valeera reacted instantly, stepping back into him and bracing him with both hands at his upper arms, stabilizing his balance against the vibrating slope. The contact was firm and practical, no ceremony, only coordination. "You are destabilizing," she said. "Then we move," he answered, forcing his legs to respond. He shifted position so that he was no longer directly behind her but slightly to her side, sharing the narrow space instead of hiding within it. The storm above reached a new pitch, a high sustained resonance that felt like the inside of a turbine. Valeera's eyes flicked to him in brief surprise. "Your shield is gone," she reminded him. Ethan adjusted his stance, boots wedged against a natural groove in the rock. "Still here," he said. For a heartbeat they stood shoulder to shoulder in the tight ravine, her armor blazing with controlled light, his suit dark but steady, as the peak of the storm pressed down upon the valley and the stone around them carried the weight instead of their bodies. The storm reached its peak with a sound that no longer resembled wind but a sustained metallic resonance, as if the sky itself had become a living engine running beyond safe limits. Ethan felt the vibration through his boots and up his spine, every nerve aware that the protective layer between his body and the charged air was gone. His armor temperature warning blinked amber, then red, then steadied as internal systems throttled down to preserve core function. Queen Valeera remained beside him, crystalline plates blazing with controlled light, her defensive lattice expanding outward in overlapping arcs that deflected the worst of the descending current into the basalt walls. The ravine glowed faintly along its upper edges, thin veins of white tracing natural fault lines in the stone before fading. Another concentrated wave pressed downward, heavier than the rest, and the ground beneath them shifted slightly as if settling under enormous weight. Ethan's knees buckled for half a second. He caught himself against the rock, breath coming slower now, each inhale measured. Valeera turned toward him immediately, one hand steadying his shoulder. "Your vital signs are declining," she said, the composure in her voice strained by something new, something closer to urgency. He nodded once, vision narrowing at the edges. "Storm will break soon," he answered. "They always do." A narrow fissure opened along the ravine wall 10 feet above them, not a violent rupture but a subtle crack responding to stress. Fine fragments of basalt tumbled down in a soft cascade. Valeera's gaze tracked upward, calculating structural failure probability. "If the upper ridge collapses, this channel will become a conduit," she said. Ethan understood. Energy would follow the path of least resistance. So would gravity. He forced himself upright again and shifted position, placing his body slightly forward, closer to the narrowing throat of the passage where the stone curved inward. "You are relocating," she observed. "Yes," he said simply. The next discharge descended almost vertically into the seam of sky above them. Valera's armor absorbed most of it, flaring so brightly that the ravine walls reflected her light in sharp blue facets. But the residual current sought ground, racing along the basalt and into the narrowing throat where Ethan now stood. His armor convulsed under the surge, systems overloading in a cascade of warning tones before falling silent one by one. He did not cry out. He leaned into the rock instead, bracing himself so the energy would pass through the suit's outer frame and into the stone rather than across Valera's shielding field. The surge lasted only seconds. It felt longer. When it faded, the fissure above sealed under redistributed pressure, the wall stabilizing as the storm core began its slow rotation past their position. Ethan's suit went dark except for minimal life support. He swayed once more. Valera stepped forward immediately, catching him before he could fall, her arm supporting his weight with unexpected gentleness. "You placed yourself at the focal point," she said quietly. It was not accusation. It was realization. Ethan's breathing was shallow but steady. "You needed the field intact," he managed. "Your people are still out there." Above them, the tone of the storm shifted again, lowering in pitch as the central mass moved beyond the ravine. The pressure eased by degrees. Valera looked up at the fading brilliance and then back down at the human in her grasp. For the first time since she had set foot on this world, her expression held no calculation at all. Only understanding. The storm's resonance lowered from a punishing scream to a distant, rolling thunder, and with it the pressure in the ravine eased just enough for breathing to feel possible again. Fine dust continued to drift from the basalt walls, glowing faintly before settling on Queen Valera's armor and the darkened plates of Ethan's suit. He sagged fully into her grasp now, his weight heavy and unresisting, boots scraping lightly against the stone. The external lights on his armor were gone, replaced by a single dim indicator near his collar that blinked at long, uneven intervals. Valera adjusted her stance, redistributing his mass with efficient precision. Though he was shorter by nearly a foot, his armored frame still carried close to 250 pounds. She lifted him without ceremony, one arm beneath his shoulders, the other securing his legs, and turned toward the deeper end of the ravine where the ground leveled out. The air was still charged, but no longer lethal. Above them, the seam of sky shifted from blinding white to muted violet as the core of the storm rotated away toward the western ridge. She moved carefully along the narrow channel, each step deliberate to avoid loose stone or residual conduction. Ethan's head tilted slightly against her shoulder, visor cracked but intact, breath fogging faintly inside the helmet before clearing. His voice emerged weak but conscious. "Storm, moving off," he murmured. "Yes," she answered, softer now, not projecting, not commanding. Just speaking. As she reached the wider basin at the end of the ravine, she knelt and lowered him against a natural rise in the rock, positioning him so his upper body remained elevated. Her gauntlet flared to life as she scanned his suit integrity. Multiple systems were offline. External shielding completely depleted. Internal temperature elevated but stabilizing. Cardiac rhythm slow, but consistent. She withdrew her hand and regarded him for a long moment. The valley beyond the ravine was visible now through the narrow opening, the once violent sky breaking apart into lead bands of thinning light. Distant silhouettes of damaged craft dotted the landscape, some human, some of her own fleet, all equally small beneath the vast sky. She activated a long-range comm channel, overriding standard encryption protocols with her authority code. "This is Valera Threx," she transmitted, voice resonant once more, though altered by what had just occurred. "All surviving units are to suspend engagement immediately. Prioritize recovery operations for any life signs detected within a 2-mile radius of my coordinates. All species." There was a brief silence on the channel, filled with static and disbelief. Then acknowledgements began to filter back, hesitant but obedient. She ended the transmission and looked down at Ethan again. He opened his eyes halfway, vision unfocused but aware enough to register her silhouette against the dim sky. "You could have left," he said quietly. She studied him, the human who had placed himself between her and a force that could have ended them both. "So could you," she replied. The wind outside the ravine softened to a low whisper, carrying away the last fragments of charged dust. For the first time since the battle began, there was no roar overhead, no flashing arcs along the ridge line. Only silence settling over fractured ground. Valeera rose and then, without hesitation, lifted Ethan once more into her arms. The extraction shuttle beacon blinked faintly in the distance, less than half a mile east. She stepped out of the ravine and into the cooling valley, carrying him across stone still warm from the storm, her armor dimming from brilliant blue to a steady, restrained glow as the sky slowly cleared above them. The valley lay quiet beneath a sky that was no longer tearing itself apart. Thin bands of fading violet drifted westward, leaving behind a washed-out blue that felt almost fragile after the violence of light. Queen Valeera carried Ethan Cole across the basalt plain with measured steps, her armor dimmed to a steady glow that matched the cooling ground beneath her boots. Each footfall echoed softly in the open space where moments ago thunder had ruled. The human extraction shuttle beacon blinked ahead at regular intervals, a small, stubborn pulse against the vast horizon. Ethan stirred in her arms as they crossed the final stretch of fractured stone. His visor was cracked along one edge, spidering outward like frozen lightning, but his breathing had steadied into a slow, resilient rhythm. She could feel it through the layered plates of her gauntlet where his back rested. A cluster of human figures emerged from behind the ridge near the shuttle, weapons lowered but ready, their silhouettes tense against the brightening sky. They froze when they saw who approached. An alien war sovereign walking alone across the battlefield, carrying one of their own. Valeera did not slow. She did not project dominance. She simply walked forward until she was within 20 feet of the shuttle ramp. "Stand down," she transmitted across open frequencies, her voice amplified but stripped of aggression. "Engagement is suspended." The human soldiers glanced at one another before lowering their weapons completely. One of them stepped forward, helmet visor lifting to reveal wide eyes and wind-burned skin. "Sergeant Cole," he breathed. Valeera knelt carefully and lowered Ethan onto the extended ramp, positioning him so that the shuttle medics could reach him easily. As her hands withdrew, Ethan's eyes opened halfway. The bright sky reflected faintly in their pale blue. He focused on her with effort. "Told you," he murmured, voice thin but steady, "storms break." For a brief moment she said nothing. The medics moved in around him, scanning, stabilizing, speaking in quick, controlled tones. She remained kneeling beside the ramp, towering even at that angle, her gaze fixed on the human who had chosen to stand in the path of energy not meant for him. "Your physiology is inefficient," she said quietly, just loud enough for him to hear. "Yet your decisions are not." A faint hint of a smile touched his expression before exhaustion pulled his eyes closed again. The shuttle systems powered up, turbines humming at low idle. Beyond them, across the valley, alien recovery craft had begun descending as well, responding to her earlier command. No weapons fired. No engines roared in pursuit. Only coordinated movement beneath a clearing sky. Valeera rose to her full height as the shuttle ramp began to lift. For a second, Ethan's gloved hand shifted weakly against the metal floor. She placed her palm briefly against the side of the craft in silent acknowledgement before stepping back. The shuttle ascended in a controlled vertical climb, wind from its thrusters stirring dust around her boots but not forcing her to retreat. She watched until it became a distant silhouette against the morning light. Around her, the battlefield no longer felt like a place of conquest. It felt like aftermath. She opened a secure channel to her fleet, voice calm and irrevocable. "Record this," she said. "Strength without restraint is not supremacy. It is weakness disguised." High above,